Hey guys, and welcome back to the channel. Today we're gonna do Advent of Code 2015, day 12, a bit of old school JSON parsing. So let's directly head over to the problem description. So we have a JSON document that contains arrays and objects, numbers and strings. And our first job is just to find all the numbers throughout the document and sum up all those numbers. Okay, so the solution for part 1 is quite easy and straightforward. I just used a regex matching numbers and then just reduced and summed up all of the numbers that were found and that could be casted to an integer. And that's the solution for part 1. Part 2 now is that the elves realized that they double counted everything that contains red. So we should ignore every object, that's important, every object that contains red. Looking at the bottom, you actually see that's not going to be that easy with a typed language, because you can't just say all arrays are integers or stuff like that. Those are arrays with mixed type, and it's not easy to replicate in a strongly typed language. But first, let's look at how you would usually parse JSON using Swift. Let's say we have a struct called message, and that struct message has a text and a title. So now you received that JSON message from a server and you want to parse that message to that struct called message. What you typically do in Swift is just use the protocol Codable, and now you can use a JSON encoder and decoder to encode and decode JSON messages. You could also just specify decodable, because you will never want to encode it, just to decode it. When it comes to parsing of JSON objects that are a bit more difficult, what you can do is you can write your own initializer. Specify those coding keys. So if you, for example, the server doesn't call it text but calls that body, you could then say text is actually body, and then that will still work. So you get title body1 and body2, hello there. You can still combine that in here and say you have a case body1 and a case body2. You could parse those two. Then you have two fields in the JSON object, but on your struct you only have one, because it might make it easier for you depending on the use case you have. However, not knowing the structure of our JSON makes it really hard to build a struct or something that conforms to Codable and actually decodes whatever we want. So I went back to the old style of parsing JSON by hand using JSON serialization. And what you then get is an any, because it doesn't know what the underlying stuff is, can then parse it by hand. Looking at the input, we know that we have an object and not an array. So we first try to parse our JSON serialized to a dictionary of string and any, and then call a method named parse. So what that method actually does is it iterates through every item in the object, looks whether it's a string, an integer, an array, or another nested object, and handles those cases individually. So let's first start with a number, for example. So if we can cast it to an integer, it's a number, and we can increase the count because we're still counting everything. If it's a dictionary, we cast it to a dictionary of string any, and then just recursively call our function. And since we're adding up the numbers, the function will just return the value. So what we do is we recursively go through every object and count how many numbers there are inside that object. Now the two cases I didn't explain yet are first the array. If we have an array, we do basically the same thing with a dictionary, just casting it to an array instead of a dictionary, and call the function parse with an array as an input. So we have it overloaded down here, does the same thing as the above. If it's a number, we just sum it up. If it's an array, we just call it recursively, and if it's a dictionary, we just call the object from above. So now the only step missing is to filter out objects that contain red, and we do that in here. We check, is it a string? If it is a string and that string matches red, we will just ignore the whole object and return 0. So let's quickly look at an example on how our recursive algorithm works. So the first thing we will have is parsing that part as a dictionary and then iterate over each value. So we would start here and our next step would be here. So now if we take the first one, we see that we actually have an array, and we will call the function parse array with that input, sum up everything, and that will then return 6. We're finished with that one. We have that dictionary here. We will pass the dictionary, call our function again with that as an input, iterate over everything. We will find red and we will directly finish. And that's all there is to it. Call it once, get the result via recursion, print the result, and we're done. Alright, another quick one today. Thanks for watching. I hope you learned something or at least had some fun. See you at day 13.